It didn't speak right away. He stood there, hands resting loosely at his sides now, as if even the desk had stopped being something he could lean on. The silence stretched again, but this time it was different. It wasn't avoidance, it was preparation. "When I was younger," he said finally, his voice low, controlled, "I learned very early that explanations don't protect you." Merkin didn't interrupt, she didn't nod, she didn't move. She let the words settle exactly where they fell. "If you explained yourself," Ates continued, "you gave people something to twist. Something to use against you." He paused, then added, almost clinically, "Silence was cleaner." He walked toward the window, not to look outside, but to avoid looking directly at her. "People think silence means strength," he said. "Most of the time, it just means survival." Merkin felt her chest tighten, but she kept her voice steady. Survival from what? It let out a slow breath through his nose, from being noticed. He turned back slightly, just enough to see her reaction. She didn't look confused. She didn't look shocked. She looked like she was listening. "That's why I don't like surprises," he went on. "Or raised voices, or rooms full of people pretending everything is fine." Merkin remembered the dinner, the cake, the sudden shift in him that night. "You didn't grow up in a place where people asked what you wanted," Ates said. "They told you who you were, what you were worth, and they expected you to accept it." His jaw tightened. "If you didn't, you learned what consequences felt like." The room felt smaller now, not because of what he was saying, but because of what he wasn't. Merkin took a careful step forward. "You don't have to give me details," she said softly. "I'm not asking you to relive anything." "I know," Ates replied. "That's why I'm saying this at all." He ran a hand through his hair, frustration flickering across his face, not at her, but at himself. "I don't know how to talk about it without sounding like I want pity," he said, "and I hate pity." "You don't sound like that," Merkin said immediately. He looked at her then, really looked at her. "That's the part that scares me," he admitted. "You hear things without turning them into weapons." The words hung between them. "For a long time," Ates said quieter now, "I built my life around control, predictability. If I could see things coming, I could handle them." "And tonight," Merkin asked gently. "Tonight," he said, "I realized that control is starting to cost me more than it protects." He glanced at the door, as if half expecting someone to interrupt, then back at her. "I don't know how to tell you everything," he said. "Not yet." Merkin nodded. "Then don't tell me what you can." Ates considered that for a moment. Then he spoke again. "I didn't have a place that felt like home," he said. "Not until much later." Merkin felt something shift inside her, not shock, not sadness, understanding. "That's all I can say tonight," Ates added. "If I go further, I'll shut down, and I don't want to do that." She stepped closer now, closing the remaining distance, but she didn't touch him. She didn't need to. "Thank you for saying even this," she said quietly. "I know it wasn't easy." Ates nodded once. "I didn't say it because it was easy," he replied. "I said it because if I didn't, I was going to lose something that matters." Merkin's throat tightened. "Me." His answer came without hesitation. "Us?" The word landed softly, but it changed the room. For the first time that night, Ates exhaled as if he had been holding his breath for years. And Merkin understood something clearly then. This wasn't a confession meant to fix the past. It was an opening. A narrow one, fragile, unfinished. But real. Merkin did not rush to fill the silence. She understood instinctively that this was not one of those moments where words were meant to soften the edges. Whatever had just been spoken did not need reassurance or interpretation. It needed space room to exist without being corrected, comforted, or reshaped into something easier to carry. So she stayed still. Ates noticed immediately. He noticed how she didn't step closer, didn't reach out as if physical contact could compensate for years of guarded silence. He noticed how she didn't lower her voice into sympathy or raise it into urgency. She was simply there, present, unintrusive, grounded. It unsettled him more than any reaction would have. "You don't have to say anything," he muttered after a moment, as if preparing himself for disappointment anyway. Merkin shook her head slightly. "I know," she said, "but I want to." Her voice was calm, measured, not careful in the way of someone afraid to say the wrong thing, but deliberate, as if she understood the weight of the moment and respected it enough not to rush. "You don't owe me more," she continued. "Not explanations, not details, not tonight." Yates leaned back against the desk, crossing his arms loosely, a defensive habit returning for just a second before he let it go again. "Most people say that," he replied. "And then they start asking anyway." "I'm not most people," Merkin said quietly. The words were simple, but they landed with unexpected force. He studied her face, searching for the familiar signs. Curiosity sharpened into insistence, empathy turning into pressure. He found none of it. What he saw instead was patience without expectation. And that frightened him more than anger ever could. "You're not disappointed," he said, almost questioning her rather than stating a fact. "No," she answered immediately. "Why would I be?" "You came in here," Yates said, his voice low, controlled, "knowing I was going to say something important, and all you got was fragments." Merkin considered that. "I didn't come here to collect information," she said. "I came because you asked me to be here. That mattered more." Something in his expression shifted, subtle, involuntary. He hadn't expected that answer. He hadn't expected her to separate presence from understanding. For years, he had believed that if people didn't know everything about him, they would eventually leave. Or worse, they would stay and demand more until he broke. But Merkin wasn't demanding. She moved then, but not toward him. She crossed the room and sat down in the chair near the window, deliberately choosing a place that gave him space rather than taking it. The gesture was small, but deliberate enough to be unmistakable. "I used to think," she said, looking into the dark rather than at him, "that loving someone meant figuring them out. Solving the puzzle, filling in the blanks." Yates listened, silent. "Now I think it means learning where the blanks belong," Merkin continued, "and leaving them there until the person holding them decides to share." The clock ticked steadily on the wall. The sound was no longer oppressive. It felt almost reassuring, proof that time was still moving forward. Yates uncrossed his arms and rested his hands on the edge of the desk again. The tension in his shoulders eased just slightly, as if something heavy had been set down without him fully realizing it. "I don't know what happens after this," he admitted. "I don't know if talking makes things better or worse." Merkin nodded. "Neither do I." He glanced at her, surprised by the honesty. "You're not trying to convince me of anything." "No," she said. "I'm trying to stay honest." That word again. Honesty. It had always felt like a threat to him, something that demanded exposure, vulnerability, loss of control. Tonight, it felt different. Tonight, it felt like permission. "When I start talking," Yates said after a long pause, "I'm afraid I won't know how to stop. Or that I'll say something I can't take back." Merkin turned toward him then, meeting his gaze, without closing the distance between them. "Then we stop before that happens," she said. "Not because you're weak, but because you're allowed to choose your limits." No one had ever framed it that way for him. Limits had always been enforced from the outside. Boundaries drawn by others, not by himself. The idea that he could choose when to stop, not because he was failing, but because he was protecting himself, felt unfamiliar, almost radical. Yates exhaled slowly, the breath leaving him like something long held back. He straightened, rolling his shoulders as if adjusting to a new posture, a new internal balance. "You should rest," he said finally. "It's late." Merkin stood without argument. "So should you." She walked toward the door and hurried, no sense of urgency. No fear that if she left now, everything would collapse. At the door, she stopped. "Yates," she said softly. "Yes." She turned back to him, her expression steady, open, you didn't lose anything tonight. He frowned slightly. It doesn't feel like I gained much either. That's because you're measuring it the old way, Merkin replied. Nothing was solved, nothing was fixed. She paused, then added, but you didn't hide. The words stayed with him. You gained the option, she continued, to not do this alone anymore. Whether you use it or not, that's up to you. She opened the door and left, closing it gently behind her. No dramatic exit, no final declaration. Just absence. It remained where he was, staring at the door long after the sound of her footsteps faded. He expected the familiar aftermath of tightening in his chest, the urge to shut everything down, to retreat fully into silence. It didn't come. Instead, there was something else. Stillness. Not emptiness, not relief, just a quiet steadiness, as if something inside him had shifted into a place it had never occupied before. Nothing had been resolved, nothing had been healed. But for the first time, he didn't feel exposed after speaking. He felt grounded. And that realization stayed with him as he turned off the lamp, left the study, and walked down the hallway, not back into limbo, but forward into something uncertain, unfinished, and for once, not entirely frightening.